There is a village in Scotland where it is currently January, not metaphorically. The residents celebrate Christmas on January 6th and New Year on January 13th. They follow a calendar that the rest of Britain abandoned in 1752. They have been doing this for 274 years. Nobody has told them to stop because there are only 30 of them, and reaching their island requires a ferry that runs twice a week when the weather allows it. In another village, the houses are so close to the ocean that storms come through the front doors. Literally, there is no road inside the village. Cars are banned. The only way in is on foot down a cliff, and people live there, by choice. In another, a 5,000-year-old village sat buried beneath a sand dune until a storm in 1850 ripped the dune apart and revealed a settlement older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, with stone furniture still standing in the rooms. Scotland is 78,000 square kilometres. Most visitors see the same 40 miles of it. What they miss are villages so strange, so remote, and so stubbornly inhabited that they make the rest of the country look ordinary. These are the 10 weirdest and most isolated villages in Scotland, and by number 1, you will question whether the people who live there have lost their minds or found something the rest of us have been missing. Before we start, drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and what time it is right now. Number 10. Crowvey, the village where the ocean comes through the front door. On the northeast coast of Scotland, wedged between a vertical cliff face and the North Sea, there is a single row of stone cottages, so close to the water that storm waves do not crash nearby. They crash into the buildings themselves. Crowvey has no road. Cars cannot enter the village. Bicycles are banned. The only way in is to walk down a steep cliff path carrying whatever you brought with you. Groceries, furniture, building materials. Everything enters Crowvey on someone's back or in a wheelbarrow pushed along a footpath barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. The village exists because of a landlord. In the 19th century, the landowner of the surrounding estate decided he preferred sheep to tenants. He cleared the population from the productive inland fields, a practice known as the Highland clearances, and the displaced families had nowhere to go except the narrow strip of rock between the cliff and the sea. They built homes there because it was the only ground nobody else wanted. For over a century, Crowvey functioned as a fishing village. Boats launched directly from the front doors. The catch was processed on the same strip of stone where children played. Then, in January 1953, a catastrophic storm struck the northeast coast. Waves destroyed several cottages and damaged most of the rest. The majority of residents left permanently. The fishermen relocated to Gardenstown, the larger village across the bay. Today, roughly 50 cottages remain. A handful have permanent residents. The rest are holiday homes owned by people who visit in summer and lock the doors before the storms return. There are no shops, no pubs, no cafes, no services of any kind inside the village. The nearest supplies are in Gardenstown, which requires walking up the cliff path, driving to the village, and returning the same way. In winter, the path can be treacherous. A village where cars cannot go, where the ocean enters the houses during storms, where the entire community exists because a landlord chose sheep over people, and where the residents who remain have decided that the inconvenience of carrying everything they need down a cliff is an acceptable price for living somewhere that time, and the modern world have simply failed to reach. Number 9. Gearannan, the village where you sleep in a house designed for people and cattle. On the western coast of the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, roughly 240 kilometres from the Scottish mainland across open Atlantic water, a cluster of low stone buildings with thatched roofs sits on a hillside above the sea. These are black houses, and they look like they belong in the Iron Age because, architecturally, they nearly do. A black house is a traditional Scottish dwelling built from dry stone walls, typically over a metre thick, with a thatched roof held down by ropes and stones against Atlantic winds. There is no chimney. Smoke from the central peat fire escapes through the thatch, which is the reason the roof turns black over time, giving the buildings their name. The design is ancient. Variations of it have been built in Scotland for over 1,000 years. The distinctive feature of a black house is that humans and their livestock shared the same building. The animals lived at one end, the family at the other. The body heat from the cattle helped warm the interior during winter. The arrangement was practical, not primitive. In a climate where winter storms can last days and temperatures drop well below freezing, sharing a roof with your livestock was a survival strategy. The black houses at Gearannan were inhabited until the 1970s. That is not a typo. People lived in these homes, with peat fires and no chimney, within living memory. The village was abandoned when the last residents moved to modern housing. It sat empty for years. In the 1990s, a restoration project transformed the black houses into a museum and self-catering accommodation. Visitors can now sleep in a restored black house, on the same coast where generations of crofters raised families in rooms they shared with cattle, heated by burning peat cut from the moor behind the village. The nearest town of any size is Stornoway, roughly 40 minutes by car. The ferry from the mainland to Lewis takes nearly 3 hours. The flight from Inverness is short but runs limited schedules. Getting to Gearannan is a commitment. Staying there is a negotiation with a landscape that has been making the same offer for a millennium, beauty in exchange for comfort. Most people refused, some accepted, and the black houses are still standing because the walls were built thick enough to outlast the people who built them. Number 8. Applecross, the village behind the mountain pass that closes without warning. On the northwest coast of Scotland, the village of Applecross sits on a peninsula that is separated from the rest of mainland Britain by either a long coastal single-track road or the Bealach Nabba. The Bealach Nabba is the reason most people have heard of Applecross. It is also the reason some people have decided never to go. The pass rises to 626 metres, making it the third highest road in Scotland. The gradient reaches 20% in places. The hairpin bends are tight enough that larger vehicles are formally advised not to attempt them. In summer, it is a drive that demands full attention. In winter, it closes, not occasionally, regularly, sometimes for days. When the Bealach shuts, the only way in or out of Applecross by road is the coastal route around the peninsula. That route adds hours to a journey that was already long. This is not a theoretical inconvenience. This is a structural feature of daily life. Residents check forecasts before committing to journeys the way most people check their phone before leaving the house. A forgotten item at the supermarket is not a quick errand. It is a calculation about whether the road is open, whether the weather holds, and whether the journey is worth the risk. The village has around 500 residents spread across the peninsula. There is a primary school, a community hall, and a famous inn sitting on the shore of the bay. The Applecross Inn draws visitors from across Scotland specifically for the experience of arriving somewhere that feels genuinely hard to reach. Seafood is landed locally. The setting is extraordinary, but the visitors leave. The residents stay, and staying means managing the reality that your village sits behind one of the most dangerous approach roads in Britain, behind a mountain pass that the weather closes without negotiation, in a location where the nearest town with full services requires a commitment measured in hours and conditions rather than convenience. Applecross is not merely remote, it is conditionally accessible. You can reach it when the mountain allows it. When the mountain does not, you wait. Number 7. Kinlochbervie. The village that feeds London's finest restaurants from the end of a road nobody drives. At the end of a single-track road in the far northwest of Sutherland, roughly 30 kilometres north of the nearest thing resembling a town, there is a harbour. The harbour operates one of the most active fish markets in Scotland. Boats come in from the North Atlantic, carrying whitefish, langoustines, and shellfish. The market runs through the night. Lorries arrive before dawn, load up, and begin the drive south, while most of Scotland is still asleep. The fish does not stay in Kinlochbervie. It does not supply the surrounding communities, which are too small to absorb the volume. It travels south, to Glasgow, to London, to the wholesale markets and restaurant suppliers that feed the highest-end dining establishments in Britain. Seafood pulled from the North Atlantic off the northwest coast of Scotland lands on tables in Mayfair and Knightsbridge within 24 hours. The chefs at those restaurants describe the provenance proudly. Line Court, Scottish waters, northwest coast. What they do not always mention is that the community producing that seafood has around 600 residents, cannot easily access a hospital without a journey of several hours, and is connected to the rest of Scotland by a single-track road through empty moorland that functions as both a highway and a sheep crossing. The village has a small shop, a primary school, and a health centre that covers an enormous surrounding area. The drive to Kinlochbervie from the A838 passes through landscapes so open and uninhabited that the village, when it finally appears around a bend above Loch Inchard, feels like something that should not logically be there. Kinlochbervie feeds some of the most expensive restaurants in Britain from one of the most underserved communities in Scotland. The distance between where the fish is caught and where it is celebrated has never been wider. The langoustine that costs £40 on a plate in Chelsea was landed by a man whose nearest hospital is a 3-hour drive through moorland, where the mobile signal disappears after the first 10 minutes. Every village so far is on the mainland or reachable by road, however difficult that road might be. The next 3 are not on the mainland. They are on islands, and the isolation of an island is a different thing entirely, because when the ferry stops, the road to the rest of the world does not just close, it ceases to exist. Number 6, Fair Isle. The most remote inhabited island in Britain where the knitwear is more famous than the people. Halfway between Orkney and Shetland, surrounded by open North Sea in every direction, there is an island of roughly 3 square miles with a population that fluctuates between 50 and 70 people. Fair Isle is one of the most isolated permanently inhabited islands in the British Isles. Depending on who you ask and how you measure, it may be the most isolated. The ferry from Shetland runs twice a week in summer. In winter, the schedule contracts. Weather cancellations are frequent. There are periods during the winter months when Fair Isle receives no ferry service for weeks at a time. A small aircraft operates from a grass airstrip on the island, but flights are equally weather dependent and carry only a handful of passengers. The island has no doctor. Medical emergencies are handled by trained first responders among the residents until the Coast Guard helicopter can reach the island from Shetland, roughly 40 minutes by air in good conditions. In storms, that response time extends considerably, but Fair Isle is globally famous, not for its isolation but for its knitwear. Fair Isle patterns, the distinctive geometric designs knitted in multiple colors, originated on this island and have become one of the most recognized textile traditions in the world. The patterns appear in luxury fashion collections. They are studied in textile schools. The name Fair Isle has become a generic term for a style of knitting that the island's residents have been practicing for centuries. The island also operates one of the most important bird observatories in Europe. Fair Isle Bird Observatory, rebuilt after a fire in 2019, monitors migration patterns across the North Sea. Rare vagrant species from Siberia, North America and southern Europe are recorded on Fair Isle more frequently than almost anywhere else in Britain due to the island's position in the middle of major flight paths. An island where the population is smaller than most school classes, where medical care depends on a helicopter, where the ferry stops running when the weather decides, and where the rest of the world knows your home not as a place where people live, but as a knitting pattern. The residents of Fair Isle have produced one of the most famous textile traditions on Earth from an island that most people could not find on a map without help. Number 5. Fula. The island where Christmas is in January and the calendar stopped in 1752, 20 miles west of the Shetland mainland, rising from the North Atlantic like a wall, there is an island of roughly 5 square miles with a population of approximately 30 people. Fula is one of the most remote inhabited islands in Europe. It is also, depending on your definition of time itself, living roughly 2 weeks behind the rest of the Western world. The residents of Fula celebrate Christmas on January 6th. They celebrate New Year on January 13th. They follow the Julian calendar, the system of timekeeping that was replaced across Britain in 1752 when the country adopted the Gregorian calendar. Most of the population adjusted. Fula did not. 274 years later, the island still marks its calendar by the old system. Christmas arrives nearly 2 weeks after the rest of the country has taken down its decorations. New Year falls when mainland Scotland is already deep into January. The residents do not do this as a tourist attraction or a quirky tradition maintained for cameras. They do it because they never stopped. The ferry to Fula runs twice a week from the Shetland mainland, weather permitting. A small aircraft operates irregularly. In winter, the island can be completely cut off from the outside world for weeks at a time. There are no shops on Fula, no pubs, no cafes, no permanent medical facilities. Supplies are brought in by ferry and rationed carefully. If the ferry does not run, what you have is what you have until it does. The cliffs on the western side of Fula rise to over 370 meters, among the highest sea cliffs in Britain. The island is home to one of the largest colonies of great skuas in the world, birds aggressive enough to dive bomb anyone who walks near their nesting sites. Residents navigate their own island by knowing which areas are safe during nesting season and which will earn you a head wound. 30 people. No shops, no doctor. A ferry that runs when the ocean allows it. A calendar that the rest of the world abandoned nearly 3 centuries ago. And birds that attack you when you walk outside during the wrong month. Fula does not accommodate visitors. It barely accommodates its own residents. The people who live there have decided that none of that is a sufficient reason to leave, and the calendar they follow is the one they have always followed because nobody on Fula ever saw a reason to change it. Number 4. Durness. The village at the end of everything where the Ministry of Defence built a base and artists moved in. Durness sits at the northwest tip of mainland Scotland, which is another way of saying it sits at the end of everything. The nearest town of any size is Thurso, roughly 100 kilometres to the east along roads that are scenic, single-track in places, and entirely unforgiving in winter. Inverness is nearly 250 kilometres away. A routine hospital appointment from Durness is not an errand. It is a full day's travel, minimum. The village has around 300 residents. It has a small supermarket, a campsite that fills in summer and empties completely by October. Winter daylight lasts around 6 hours at the solstice. The weather coming off the Atlantic is sustained horizontal and capable of making outdoor movement inadvisable for days. But what makes Durness genuinely strange is not the remoteness. It is what happened when the Ministry of Defence arrived and then left. During the Cold War, the British government built a radar station at Balnachael, a kilometre east of Durness. The facility monitored air approaches from the Soviet Union over the North Atlantic. For decades, military personnel operated from concrete bunkers on the edge of the Scottish coast, watching for threats that never materialized in quite the way they expected. When the military pulled out, the concrete buildings sat empty. In the 1960s, a group of artists moved in. They converted the surveillance bunkers into studios, workshops, and a craft village that has been quietly operating for over 50 years. Today, the Balnachael Craft Village is a working creative community housed inside former military installations, producing pottery, painting, and textiles from buildings originally designed to detect incoming Soviet aircraft. A Cold War radar station built to watch for nuclear bombers, converted into an artist's colony, at the end of a road that most people in Scotland have never driven. In a village where the nearest hospital is a day trip and the winter sun sets at 3:30, Durness exists at the margin of the mainland in every sense. Distance from services, reduced daylight, weather that dictates the agenda, but it also exists as proof that the most remote corners of Scotland have a habit of producing something nobody expected. A surveillance base full of potters is exactly the kind of thing you find when you travel far enough from the version of a country that appears in the brochure. 3 villages left. One is a 5,000-year-old settlement that was buried under sand for 4 millennia and discovered by accident during a storm. One is a village that no longer exists, but whose empty streets are visited by thousands of people every year. And one is an island that was inhabited for 4,000 years until the last 36 residents asked to be evacuated because they could no longer survive. Number 3. Skara Brae, the village older than the pyramids that was hidden under sand for 4,000 years. On the western coast of mainland Orkney, overlooking the Bay of Scale, there is a cluster of stone dwellings that were built roughly 5,000 years ago. Skara Brae is older than Stonehenge. It is older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was inhabited for approximately 600 years, from around 3,180 BC to 2,500 BC, and then it disappeared. At some point around 2,500 BC, the settlement was abandoned. Sand covered it. Grass grew over the sand. For the next 4,000 years, the village sat beneath a dune on the Orkney coast, invisible, unknown, perfectly preserved by the material that buried it. In the winter of 1850, a severe storm stripped the grass and sand from the dune and exposed the outlines of stone walls. The local laird, William Watt of Scale, began excavations that revealed what lay underneath, a complete Neolithic village with stone furniture still standing in the rooms. The preservation is extraordinary. Stone beds with slab headboards remain in position. Stone dressers, shelved storage units built into the walls, stand exactly where they were placed 5 millennia ago. Hearths sit in the centers of rooms. Covered passageways connect the houses, creating a network that allowed residents to move between dwellings without going outside during storms. The village even had a drainage system. The people who lived at Skara Brae had no metal, no written language, no wheel. They built with stone because stone was what Orkney offered, and they built with it so precisely that their furniture has outlasted every wooden, metal and plastic object that has been manufactured in the 5,000 years since they left. What they ate, how they organized their society, and why they ultimately abandoned the settlement are questions that archaeologists have debated for over a century. The leading theory is that a catastrophic storm, possibly a sand burial event, made the village uninhabitable. The residents left, the sand finished the job, and the village waited beneath the dune for 4,000 years until another storm, in 1850, decided it was time for someone to see it again. A village built before the pyramids, buried by a storm, preserved by sand and revealed by another storm 4,000 years later. The furniture is still in the rooms. The hearths are still in the centers of the floors. And the people who built them are so far removed from recorded history that we do not know their names, their language, or what they called the place they lived. We call it Skara Brae, they called it something else. We will never know what. Number 2. Herta, St Kilda. The island at the end of the world that asked to be evacuated, roughly 65 kilometres west of the Outer Hebrides, further out into the Atlantic than any other inhabited place in Britain. The St Kilda archipelago rises from the ocean like a fortress. The main island, Herta, has the highest sea cliffs in Britain. Conacher rises 430 metres from the water, a sheer wall of rock that disappears into cloud more often than not. People lived on Herta for approximately 4,000 years. They survived by climbing the cliffs to harvest seabirds and their eggs. The fulmar, the gannet, and the puffin were the foundation of the St Kildan diet. The islanders developed a technique of scaling vertical cliff faces barefoot using ropes made from horsehair, a skill passed from father to son for generations. Boys learnt to climb before they could read. Falling was not uncommon. Surviving the fall was. The village on Herta, known simply as the village, sat in Village Bay on the eastern side of the island. Stone houses lined a single crescent-shaped street. Behind them, Hundreds of stone storage structures called klites dotted the hillside, used for drying seabirds, storing peat, and preserving food. Over 1,200 klites survive on Herta and the surrounding islands. They are visible from the sea, scattered across the landscape like the ruins of a civilization that ended quietly rather than violently. By the early 20th century, life on St Kilda was becoming unsustainable. The population had declined to 36. Young people were leaving for the mainland. When the island's only nurse died, there was no replacement. Influenza and other diseases brought by the occasional visiting boat devastated the small community. Food became harder to secure as the younger climbers left and the older ones aged beyond the cliff face. On August 29, 1930, the remaining 36 residents of St Kilda signed a letter to the British government requesting evacuation. The letter stated that they could no longer sustain life on the island and asked to be removed to the mainland. The government agreed. On the morning of the evacuation, each resident placed their Bible on the table of their home, banked the fire, and closed the door. The dogs were left behind, the homes were left as they were, and the last 36 people to inhabit an island that had been continuously occupied for 4 millennia stepped onto a boat and sailed east toward a world most of them had never seen. Today, Herta is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of only a handful of places in the world to hold dual designation for both natural and cultural significance. The military maintains a small base on the island for a missile tracking station. National Trust for Scotland volunteers visit during summer to maintain the village. But nobody lives there permanently. Nobody has since 1930. The street is still there, the houses are still there, the klites are still standing on the hillside. And the cliffs where children learn to climb 400-meter rock, faces barefoot for the right to eat, are still dropping into the Atlantic, as they have been for longer than anyone can remember. An island inhabited for 4,000 years. Evacuated in a single morning. Bibles on the tables, fires banked, doors closed, the dogs stayed, the people left, and the village has been empty ever since. And now, number one, this village is not abandoned. It is not historical. People live there right now. And what makes it the strangest place on this list is not where it is. Though it is extraordinarily remote, it is what its residents refuse to do, and have been refusing to do for longer than Scotland has been a country. Number 1. Invery, Knoydart, the village with no road and the pub you can only reach by sea or on foot. On the western coast of Scotland, on a peninsula between Loch Nevis and Loch Horn, there is a community of roughly 100 people that has no road connection to anywhere. No road in, no road out, no road connecting it to any other settlement, any town, any city, any part of the national road network. Invery is the largest settlement in mainland Britain that cannot be reached by car. The only ways to get there are by boat or on foot. The ferry runs from Malaig, a small port town roughly 11 kilometres across Loch Nevis. The crossing takes roughly 25 minutes. If you miss the ferry or the weather cancels it, the alternative is a 2-day hike through some of the most rugged and least populated terrain in Western Europe. The overland route crosses mountain passes exceeding 800 metres, follows paths that are not always clearly marked, and passes through landscape where you will not see another person for hours. Invery has a primary school, a community shop, a tea room, a bunkhouse for hikers, and a pub. The Old Forge is the most remote pub in mainland Britain. Reaching it requires either a sea crossing or a 2-day trek through mountains. The pub serves seafood landed from the loch, beer brewed on the premises, and a view across the water toward the Quillen Mountains on Skye. It has been named Britain's most remote pub by the Guinness Book of World Records. The Knoydart Peninsula has been inhabited for thousands of years. It was populated by crofters who farmed the land and fished the lochs. During the Highland clearances of the 19th century, the population was forcibly reduced when the landowner evicted families to make way for sheep. The displaced residents were put on boats to Canada and Australia. Some walked to the coast and never returned. In 1999, the remaining residents of Knoydart did something extraordinary. They bought the land through the Knoydart Foundation. The community purchased the estate from its private owner, ending centuries of landlord control and establishing community ownership of the peninsula. The people who were once cleared from the land now own it. There has never been a road to Invery. Plans have been proposed multiple times over the decades. The residents have consistently rejected them. They do not want a road. A road, they argue, would change the character of the place irreversibly. It would bring traffic development and the kind of accessibility that erases the very thing that makes Knoydart what it is. They have made a deliberate, collective and recurring decision to remain disconnected from the road network of mainland Britain. This is not isolation imposed by geography. This is isolation chosen by the people who live there. The mountain pass exists. The route could be built. The residents have said no, and they have been saying no for as long as anyone has been asking. A village with no road, no car access, no connection to the rest of the country except a boat and a footpath. A pub you can only reach by sea or by walking for 2 days through mountains. A community that was cleared from the land by a landlord, bought the land back from the next one, and then refused to build the road that would connect them to the world that displaced them. The people of Inverie are not trapped, they are choosing. And the thing they are choosing, the thing that makes this the strangest village in Scotland, is the right to remain unreachable. 10 villages. A row of cottages where the ocean comes through the front door. A house shared with cattle until the 1970s. A mountain pass that closes without negotiation. A fishing harbour supplying Mayfair from the end of a road nobody drives. An island where Christmas arrives 2 weeks late. A 5,000-year-old village hidden under sand until a storm revealed it. An island evacuated in a single morning after 4,000 years. And a community that has been refusing to build a road for longer than most countries have existed. Scotland's isolation is not uniform. It runs on a spectrum from manageable remoteness to complete disconnection. And the villages on this list sit at different points along it. What they share is not hardship exactly. It is a different set of priorities. Space over convenience, quiet over connection, landscape over everything. If you have been to any of these villages or if there is a stranger, more remote Scottish community we missed, tell us in the comments, subscribe for more, and we will see you next time.